Step 4. Data collection. Once the statement of problem is stated, hypothesis S formulated and research design is finalized, one can then move to the next step, that is data collection. In this step, though, one has to first of all identify the population and sample. In the case of our example, the population that is being studied is caregivers of chronically ill patients. The researcher will have to select a sample size and also a sampling technique to carry the study on. This will be discussed in detail in the next unit. Further, tools for data collection also need to be finalized, that could range from interview, observation to psychological tests. In the case of the example discussed by us, a researcher may decide to use standardized psychological tests to measure resilience, psychological well-being, and adjustment. Once the sample and tools for data collection are finalized, the researcher can then carry out data collection. Step 5. Data analysis. The data thus obtained in Step 4 will be subjected to data analysis. Data analysis also can be qualitative or quantitative. If the researcher employed interview or observation as a method of data collection, then the data will be qualitatively analyzed. If she used standardized psychological tests. 23. Psychological research, then the obtained raw score can be subjected to statistical analysis. We will discuss some of the statistical techniques in later units of this course. Step 6. Deriving conclusions and making generalizations. Based on the data analysis, the researcher can then draw conclusions and make generalizations, that is, the results generated from the sample, representative, can then be generalized to the population. It is also important at this stage to adequately report the findings of the research for the benefit of other researchers, experts, students, and society in general. A simplified version of research process can be seen in Figure 1.1 that looks like an hourglass, where the process starts with a general research idea that the researcher may have in mind. For example, a researcher may have an idea to carry out research on caregivers of chronically ill patients. From this general research idea, after referring to review of literature, the researcher will identify specific variables and then follow the other steps of research from stating the problem, formulating hypothesis, S, finalizing research design to data collection and data analysis. The results thus obtained can then be used to draw conclusions and make generalizations. Point 3. Ethical issues in psychological research. Research in psychology is necessarily carried out on humans and animals, and in this regard it is important to follow certain ethical issues while carrying out research, in order to ensure that they are treated in a respectful way. Before we go on to discuss various ethical issues, let us look at two of the experiments that raised questions related to ethics in research. A research was carried out by John Watson in order to study whether emotional responses are learned. The study was carried out on a young child named Albert. In the study, Albert was repeatedly exposed to a white rat. Initially, he did not show any negative reaction to the white rat. However, when the exposure to the white rat was accompanied repeatedly with a loud noise, Albert displayed negative reaction to the white rat. Further, as the study continued, Albert displayed negative reactions towards stimuli that were similar to white rat, like white rabbit and fur coat. This study raised some serious ethical issues, as there is no mentions whether any informed consent was taken from the parents, guardian of Albert, Albert being a minor. Further, ethical issues can also be raised with regard to whether it was really fair to subject Albert to such conditions and instilling fear in him that could have repercussions later in his life. Yet another study was carried out by Zimbardo and is known as Stamford Prison Experiment. In this research, Zimbardo attempted to study participants' group behavior, how they adopted the abusive roles in the process of following certain orders. In this study, a simulation of prison was created and the participants were divided into two groups, prisoners and guards. The participants also signed a contract and received Monodora benefits. The guards were given instructions by Zimbardo, who acted as a warden of the prison, to maintain order amongst the prisoners, though any physical aggression was not allowed. The experiment had to be ended within a few days, as role was internalized by the participants to such an extent that the guards were displaying aggressive behavior that negatively affected the participants who played the role of prisoners. This experiment as well raised certain ethical issues, as the beneficence of the participant was at stake. Thus, the above two experiments and many more led to more and more focus on ethical issues in research in order to ensure well-being of the participants. As such, the origin of ethical codes can be found in the Hippocratic Oath that was written way back in 400 BC. Though, ethics in research received attention mainly after certain studies, as discussed above, raised questions regarding safety as well as welfare of the participants in research. The experiments carried out by Nazis during World War II also led to development of the Nuremberg Code, that mainly focused on informed consent and coercion, that was a result of the Nuremberg war crime trials. Besides, there were other studies as well that raised ethical issues, like the Tuskegee syphilis study that was conducted by the U.S. Public Health Services in 1930s on African Americans, having low income, who suffered from syphilis. The participants were not aware that they were suffering from syphilis and were not given any treatment, penicillin, as they participated in the study. 25. Psychological research. Yet another study on how development of children is affected by social interaction was carried out by René Spitz in 1940s. The study involved two groups of children whose development were studied from birth onwards. One of these groups were babies in orphanages who were deprived of any human contact and appropriate care. The other group of babies, from prison nursery, belonged to incarcerated mothers, who received care from their mothers. The results of the study indicated that social deprivation had an impact on the development of the children. Thus, such studies brought ethical issues and concern for safety and welfare of participants in the light. The Belmont Report was presented by U.S. Department of Health, Education and Welfare in 1979, where three ethical principles were highlighted. Respect for persons, recognizing the autonomy of the participants and protecting those with lower autonomy. Beneficence, maximizing benefits and minimizing any harm and risk to the participants. Justice, fairness in terms of who receives the benefits of research and faces risks. These ethical principles were later stated as regulations by Department of Health and Human Services and the Food and Drug Administration. In 1991, they were adopted by the Federal Policy for the Protection of Human Subjects. American Psychological Association proposed their own ethical standards in 1953, that were revised from time to time. And these are the ethical issues that we mainly follow while we conduct research. Ethics as such are relevant at every stage of research. Any research is to be carried out keeping in mind the risk and benefit ratio. If the risks are high and benefits are low, there is no point in carrying out the research. If the benefits are high and risks are low, provided that the minimal risks are taken care of, the research can be initiated. If the benefits and risks both are low, then again there is no use of carrying out the research. If the benefits and risks both are high, then the decision with regard to whether the research should be carried out or not is difficult. But such researches can be carried out by managing the risks. Besides, the vulnerability of the population also needs to be kept in mind. For example, children can be considered as vulnerable population. Further, in psychological research, deception is also used. Deception can be defined as efforts by researchers to withhold or conceal information about the purpose of a study from the persons who participate in it. Barron and Byrne, 1995, page 31. Though deception needs to be avoided, it may not be possible to do so in case of certain researches. Using deception could also raise certain ethical issues, as the participants may not be pleased when they come to know about the actual objectives of the research and may in fact resent for participating in research and may avoid participating in any research in future. Further, deception may lead to the participants being subjected to stress and anxiety. If deception cannot be totally avoided, then it should be ensured that the participants don't face any serious risk during the research, and debriefing needs to be provided. In debriefing, after the data is collected from the participants, information about the research is provided to them, their doubts are clarified, and privacy and confidentiality are assured. 26. Research in psychology. There are certain significant ethical issues that need to be considered before any research is carried out. These are discussed as follows. Beneficence and non-maleficence. A research needs to be carried out by keeping in mind its benefits to the participants, beneficence, and it should be ensured that the participants are not subjected to any harm, non-maleficence. Thus, any risk to the participants is to be identified and eliminated, and if there is any minimal risk, the participants need to be informed about the same, and their consent for participation in the research needs to be taken. Privacy and confidentiality. In any research, privacy and confidentiality of the participants is to be maintained. The researcher needs to take adequate care to ensure that the identity of the participants is not revealed. The participants may seek privacy and may not want others to know that they participated in the research. For instance, an employee may participate in certain research being carried out in his/her organization but may not want other employees to know about the same. Confidentiality is equally important as is privacy, where information and details regarding the participants are not shared by the researcher with others. One way in which privacy and confidentiality can be assured is by using codes instead of the names of the participants. Anonymity. Anonymity denotes that even the researcher may not be able to identify the participant. In anonymity, the participants may have objection to others knowing that they participated in the research, but may have no problem with their performance details being shared. Informed consent. As discussed earlier, the participants need to be informed about the details of the research, and this is done by taking informed consent from the participants. According to Berg, 1998, page 47, informed consent means the knowing consent of individuals to participate as an exercise of their choice, free from any elements of fraud, deceit, duress, or similar unfair inducement or manipulation. Though, when deception is used in psychological research, obtaining informed consent could be a challenge, as is also true when a study is carried out with the help of naturalistic observation. An informed consent needs to provide details about the research, including the duration, procedure, and benefits of participating, including incentives, if any, in research. It also needs to mention the participant's right to decline from participating in research or to leave or withdraw even after the research has started. Any consequences with regard to denying to participate in research or withdrawing from the research also need to be explained in the informed consent. The participants also need to be updated with any risks that they may face during their participation. If there are any limitations with regard to confidentiality, the same also needs to be mentioned in the informed consent. Lastly, the details of contact person whom the participants can contact in case if they have any query also need to be mentioned in the informed consent. For detailed information on the principles of psychologists and code of conduct given by American Psychological Association, refer to the following link https://www.apa.org/ethics/code. 27. Psychological research. With regard to research on animals as well, ethical guidelines need to be followed. An assessment of cost and benefit needs to be carried out before such a research is carried out, and due care needs to be taken in acquiring, caring, maintaining as well as disposal of the animals. Care also needs to be taken to ensure minimal discomfort and pain to the animals. Guidelines in this regard as well have been provided by the American Psychological Association. Ethical issues are significant at every stage of research, right from selecting the research problem, finalizing the research design, sample to data collection and analysis and reporting of the research. While the research is being written and reported, the researcher needs to ensure that there is no plagiarism and that the sources cited in the research are duly acknowledged. Deductive and inductive methods. Deductive and inductive methods are two important methods in research. These are discussed as follows. Deductive method. Deductive method is also termed as a top-down approach or method of explanation, verification. It mainly involves testing of a theory. Based on a theory, hypotheses are formulated, that are then tested in order to validate or invalidate the theory. The focus of this method is on cause and effect relationship between the variables. Deductive methods mainly rely on the quantitative approach to research, though in certain situations qualitative approach may also be employed. Deductive method is more structured, as there is a clear and specific aim that is to be achieved, and is less time-consuming when compared to inductive method. In deductive method, a larger sample size is taken in order to facilitate generalization of the results. 28. Research in psychology. Inductive method. Inductive method is also termed as bottom-up approach or method of discovery. It mainly involves deriving a new theory. This method usually starts with a research question that is aimed to specify the scope of the research. The method mainly involves exploration of a novel phenomenon, event, or studying the phenomenon, event from a new perspective. In doing so, inductive method may make use of qualitative methods of research. Inductive method is less structured and more time-consuming when compared with deductive method. Inductive method is less concerned with generalization and focuses on comprehending the context of the research. The decision whether to use deductive or inductive method will mainly depend on the purpose of the research, whether a research problem needs to be answered, a hypothesis is to be tested, or a new theory is to be explored. Though, in certain cases, both the methods may be used in a research. Problem and formulation of hypotheses. It is important to discuss problem and hypothesis because the investigation carried out by the researcher is directed by the problem and hypothesis, and they help researcher in knowing what she is supposed to do. Problem and hypothesis also play an important role in confirmation or disconfirmation of a certain theory, which in turn adds to the existing fund of knowledge of the subject area. 29. Psychological research. 1.5.1 Statement of the problem. In order to be able to seek answers to questions, it is important to know what exactly the questions are. Thus, as researcher seeks answers to certain problem or issue, having a statement of problem that is clear and specific is an important aspect of any research. Problem can be described as a statement that is interrogative in nature and focuses on the objective or purpose of the research. A problem necessarily manifests when a researcher finds a gap in knowledge related to the subject area, when the results obtained after several research on a certain issue or problem are contradictory, thus, indicating need for further research in order to arrest the contradictions, and when a fact needs to be scientifically explained. Three main criteria have been stated by Kurlinger, 1995, that determine a good statement of problem. 1. It focuses on relationship between two or more variables in the research. 2. It needs to be stated clearly and should lack any ambiguity. 3. It should be possible to subject it to scientific testing. 1.5.2 Formulation of Hypotheses. Hypothesis is a tentative statement with regard to the research problem that is investigated by the researcher. Kurlinger, 1995, page 17, defined hypothesis as a conjectural statement of the relation between two or more variables. Hypothesis, S, also needs to be formulated in a clear and unambiguous manner in such a way that it can be empirically tested. Types of hypothesis. There are two types of hypothesis. Null hypothesis. Once a researcher finalizes his research topic and variables after reviewing literature, she will have to formulate hypothesis based on the problem statement. Null hypothesis is also referred to as hypothesis of no difference, as null hypothesis implies that there is no difference between two groups. For example, if a researcher wants to study the significant difference in job satisfaction of public and private bank employees, she will formulate a null hypothesis as no significant difference exists in job satisfaction of government and private bank employees. And then based on the results obtained, the hypothesis will be rejected or accepted. Alternative hypothesis. Alternative hypothesis can be termed as a counter proposition to the null hypothesis, Viraragavan and Shikgavakar, 2016. It is formulated by a researcher based on a theory. The hypothesis states that there is a significant difference between two groups. For example, the researcher can formulate the alternative hypothesis as there will be a significant difference in job satisfaction of public and private bank employees. This is also a neutral alternative hypothesis that does not provide any direction and thus is termed as non-directional hypothesis. Alternative hypothesis can also be directional. For example, public bank employees have higher or lower job satisfaction when compared with private bank employees. Such hypotheses are formulated based on the review of literature. 30. Research in psychology. Check your progress. IV. Research, hypothesis testing, one-tailed, two-tailed tests and errors in hypothesis testing. There are various types of research in psychology like experimental research, non-experimental research, field studies, correlational research, survey research, descriptive research, and so on. Of these, in the present section of this unit, we will focus on descriptive research. As the name suggests, descriptive research involves description of certain phenomenon or event. It mainly involves observation and recording about the phenomenon or event. Descriptive research helps researcher describe certain behavioral patterns, and it can be effectively used when manipulation of variables that are being studied is not possible. The data that is collected in descriptive research could either be qualitative, quantitative, or both. Qualitative data can be organized on the basis of emerging patterns, and descriptive statistics, discussed in later units of this course, can be used to analyze the quantitative data. There are three main categories of descriptive research, viz., naturalistic observation, case study, and surveys. These are discussed as follows. 1. Naturalistic observation. This involves observation as well as recording of behavior in a natural setting. As such, there is no control and the researcher is involved in mere observation of the phenomenon or event. For example, researcher can observe a group of children playing or may want to study crowd behavior. In such a case, she can effectively use naturalistic observation that will provide valuable information about how individuals behave in a natural setup. Naturalistic observation has higher ecological validity, that is, findings can be applied in realistic situations. 31. Psychological research 2, case study. In case study, a single individual or situation is studied in an in-depth manner. For example, a person having certain psychological disorder or a rare chronic illness is studied. As such, it is not possible to make any predictions based on the case study method. While using this method, the researcher's bias could creep in, that can have an impact on the way research is carried out. 3. Survey method. In survey method, it is possible to contact a large number of individuals and carry out a survey. For example, a survey can be carried to get feedback about a certain product from general public. Questionnaires or interview can be used to collect data from the participants. It is important that the questions that have been framed are adequate, clear, and easy to understand. 1.6.1 Hypothesis testing. One of the significant aspects of research is hypothesis testing. Hypothesis is a tentative statement that is investigated during the process of research. Hypothesis pertains to certain phenomenon and is based on a theory. Data is then collected by the researcher in order to validate the hypothesis. Thus, the hypothesis is rejected or accepted by a researcher based on the results obtained. Hypothesis testing is also referred to as a process involving statistical decision-making with regard to population value that is based on the sample value. Viraragavan and Shikgavakar, 2016, page 9. Though, while drawing inference, one needs to ensure that hypothesis is not incorrectly accepted or rejected due to results that are influenced by chance factor or confounding factors. Steps in hypothesis testing. The steps involved in hypothesis testing are as follows. Step 1. Null hypothesis, S, alternative hypothesis, S, are specified. Step 2. A level of significance is selected. This level of significance could be 0.05 level or 0.01 level. The term significance in the context of statistics implies probably true, that indicates that results are free from chance factor at the specified level of significance. For example, if there exists a significant difference in job satisfaction of public and private bank employees, then the researcher could either be 95%, 0.05 level of significance, p less than 0.05, confident, or 99%, 0.01 level of significance, p less than 0.01, confident about the results obtained. This is because when carrying out research with human participants, 100% accuracy cannot be achieved. Thus, there could be 5% or 1% chance that the results are due to chance or confounding factors. Whether the null hypothesis is accepted or rejected will depend on whether the statistical value obtained after data analysis is more or less than the table value. Tables for various statistical techniques are provided at the end of any book on statistics, specified at 0.05 or 0.01 level of significance. If the obtained value is higher than the table value, then the null hypothesis is rejected, and if the obtained value is less than the table value, then the null hypothesis is accepted. Step 3. Based on the parameters specified in the null hypothesis, S, the statistic is calculated. A sample is taken by the researcher and the data is 32. Research in psychology collected. Statistic that is thus obtained from the sample, representative, is then used in order to make an estimation about the population parameters. Step 4. Decision is made whether to accept or reject the null hypothesis, S. In this regard, the p-value or probability level is computed as has been discussed under Step 2, and accordingly decision is taken by the researcher, whether to accept or reject the null hypothesis. 1.6.2 One-tailed and two-tailed tests. Any hypothesis can also be one-tailed or two-tailed. It is termed as one-tailed when certain direction is given to the hypothesis or the hypothesis is directional. For example, if the researcher is studying whether gender difference exists with regard to emotional intelligence, a one-tailed hypothesis would be, females have higher emotional intelligence than males, or males have higher emotional intelligence than females. Refer to Figure 1.2 that provides the figure for both 0.05 and 0.01 levels of significance. In one-tailed test, in order to reject a null hypothesis, the score needs to fall in the upper tail, that is in the top 5% of the distribution. A one-tailed test can be tested in either of the direction. In case of two-tailed hypothesis, the hypothesis is non-directional and will be stated as gender difference will exist with regard to emotional intelligence. In case of two-tailed test, a null hypothesis can be rejected when the score falls in the either of the top 2.5% of the distribution. Thus, the level of significance is maintained at 0.05 level, refer to Figure 1.2. As the level of significance is taken as 0.05 level, it can be taken at 0.01 level as well, in which case the prediction will be based on the lower tail. 1.6.3 Errors in hypotheses testing type 1.5. A researcher will be making a correct decision when a false null hypothesis is rejected and when a null hypothesis that is true is accepted. However, it may so happen that a null hypothesis is rejected even when it is true, and this is termed as type 1 error. On the other hand, when a false null hypothesis is accepted, then it is termed as type 2 error. 33. Psychological research. 7 Constructs, variables, operational definition of variables. This section of the unit is divided into 3 main aspects, namely, construct, variables, and operational definition of variables. 1.7.1 Constructs. When we discuss about constructs, it is also important to understand what is concept in the context of psychological research. As defined by Kurlinger, 1995, page 26, a concept expresses an abstraction formed by generalization from particulars. Thus, height can be a concept that can be expressed in terms of observation of objects that are long or short. To take an example of a psychological variable, adjustment, abstraction can be formed for adjustment based on observations of individual behavior. In a similar manner, various psychological variables can be abstracted based on certain behaviors that can be categorized together. A construct can be termed as a concept that is adopted for empirical purpose, Kurlinger, 1995. Thus, when adjustment is adopted in a research for empirical purpose, it will be termed as a construct. When a concept is adopted as a construct in a research, it is entered into the theoretical framework and thus can be related to other constructs in numerous ways. Further, constructs can be subjected to observation and measurement, Kurlinger, 1995. For instance, a standardized scale on adjustment can be used to measure the construct of adjustment. 1.7.2 Variables. Variable means something that varies. It can also be explained as quantity or a number that will vary or will have different values. If a researcher is carrying out a study on emotional intelligence and self-esteem of adolescents in India, in this study, emotional intelligence and self-esteem can be termed as variables. Emotional intelligence and self-esteem can be high or low. Both these variables can possess varied values. Even gender can be termed as a variable because it will vary in terms of males or females. Different types of variables have been discussed in Table 1.3, defined with the help of words or by describing the behaviors that are implied by the construct. In this context, one can discuss about the constitutive definition and operational definition of construct. In constitutive definition, a construct is defined in terms of other constructs, Kurlinger, 1995, page 25. For example, phobia can be defined as irrational fear. In operational definition, meaning is assigned to the construct by clearly identifying the activities on the basis of which it can be measured. Curlinger, 1995. For example, organizational citizenship behavior can be defined as a set of individual behavior that is discretionary, not directly or explicitly recognized by the formal reward system, and that in the aggregate promotes the effective functioning of the organization. By discretionary we mean the behavior is not an enforceable requirement of the role or the job description, that is, the clearly specifiable terms of the person's employment contract with the organization. The behavior is rather a matter of personal choice, such that its omission is not generally understood as punishable. Organ, 1988, page 4. It is to be noted here that though operational definition is an important aspect of any research, it may not be possible for a researcher to define a construct in such a way that the whole construct or variable is covered. Thus, the constructs as used in a research can be termed as specific as well as limited in their meaning. Curlinger, 1995, page 29. Operational definition can be categorized into two. 1. Measured operational definition. This definition focuses on how a construct can be measured. For instance, organizational citizenship behavior can be measured with the help of a standardized scale for organizational citizenship behavior. 2. Experimental operational definition. This definition described how a construct is manipulated by the researcher. For instance, employees can be categorized in two groups, one with high organizational citizenship behavior and the other with low organizational citizenship behavior. Let us sum up. To summarize, in the present unit, we discussed about psychological research, its definition, goals and principles. Research in simple terms can be explained as adding to the existing fund of knowledge. The term research is derived from the French word rechercher, which means to travel through or survey. Research can be described as an enquiry that is not only critical but complex as well. Research can also be described as an analysis and recording of controlled observation that 37. Psychological research is objective and systematic in nature. And this analysis and recording can result in generalizations and also development of theories. The main goals of psychological research are description, explanation, prediction, control and application. Besides covering the characteristics of an adequate psychological research, the steps in research process were also discussed. Another important topic in the context of psychological research, namely, the ethical issues, were also discussed in detail with a focus on beneficence and non-maleficence, privacy and confidentiality, autonomy and informed consent. Further, the deductive and inductive methods were also highlighted. Two important aspects of psychological research, statement of problem and formulation of hypothesis, S, were also explained. It is important to discuss problem and hypothesis, S, because the investigation carried out by the researcher is directed by the problem and hypothesis, S, and they help researcher in knowing what she is supposed to do. Problem and hypothesis also play an important role in confirmation or disinformation of a certain theory, which in turn adds to the existing fund of knowledge of the subject area. The unit also discussed descriptive research, hypothesis testing, one-tailed and two-tailed tests and errors in hypothesis testing. Lastly, the terms, constructs, variables and operational definition of variables were also described. A construct can be termed as a concept that is adopted for empirical purpose, and variable means something that varies. It can also be explained as quantity or a number that will vary or will have different values. In operational definition, meaning is assigned to the construct by clearly identifying the activities on the basis of which it can be measured. Operational definition can be categorized into measured operational definition and experimental operational definition. In the next unit we will mainly focus on sampling and sampling techniques.